So it's good to see everybody. It's nice also to be here with Talmidei Chachamim. You know, it's not what I'm used to. You know, talking and giving a drasha. So it's nice you can learn something a little bit more than you might hear normally. Now, there's a very fascinating halacha. This week we read Parshas Chukas, which begins with the halachas of the Paraduma. And there's a fascinating halacha the Rambam brings down. We already find in the Mishnah, the Rambam brings out a little bit more, so that's why I like to bring what the Rambam says. And you can learn Gevaldige Hashkafa from it. You can learn ideas in Jewish ideology and how we very interesting halacha from the Paraduma. So it says like this in the first parak of Hilchas Paraduma, in halacha Yud Gimel, it says Kol ha'oiskim b'Parah mitchila v'ad seif still running. That anybody who, we know that it says ish tahor, you have to be in the state of tahara, purity, ritual purity, in order to be involved with and then when you are involved with it, you become tameh. So the thing is, what level of tahara do you need to be involved with the paraduma? So there's different levels. There's something we call a tvul yoim. Tvul yoim means that if, in general, when someone goes to mikveh, they don't become ready for all kinds of tahara things. Like, for example, we're familiar with the first Mishnah in Shas, where it says, Meimosai, Kar Nishma, Barbas, Mishasha, Kaihanim, Nichnas, and Lachol, B'Trumasan. The Gemara, the Mishnah begins, the very first Mishnah in the Talmud, it begins, that says, when do we say Kriya Shema? It says, when the Kaihanim go to eat their Truma. What does that mean? Because they went, so let's say they went to the mikveh during the day, they don't reach the full level of purity until it's nighttime. And so we say that's the time it's Seisa Kechavim, the time when the stars come out, when 3 stars come out. The term Seisa Kechavim we find already in the Ksuvim, in Sefer Ezra. We find it already in Scripture. So it says, but until that point, meaning you went to the mikveh and it's not nighttime yet, you're called a tvul yom. It means that you immerse during the day. So it says, Kol ha'oiskim b'Parah mitchila v'ad sof, shahayu tvul yom kasher l'maisei Parah l'kadosh lahazis me'afara alpha pisha daim l'harav shimshon. So the halacha is that someone who's on this kind of limbo state that we call the tvul yom are allowed to be involved in the preparation and sprinkling and so forth and burning and so forth of the paraduma, even though nighttime hasn't fallen yet. They're only partially tahor, only partially pure, and not fully pure. Because whenever it says, we're going to read the Shabbos, that ish tahor, a pure man, has to gather the ashes and do all these work, it means that he's pure to eat meiser sheni. The second tithe, that on certain years there was the regular tithe that was given to the Levi, and the second tithe, meiser sheni, that you brought to Yerushalayim and you had to eat there, and you had to eat it in the state of tahara, but you had to eat it in the state of purity. But it was enough that you went to the mikveh. You didn't have to wait till nighttime. You could eat that during the day, right after you went to the mikveh. But truma, the kahanim, they had to wait till nighttime. So someone who is pure to eat meiser sheni and not to eat truma could be involved with the paraduma. Even though it's not nighttime yet, he's already pure for the halachas of the paraduma. Now here's where it gets interesting. Hatzedoikim, some pronounce Sadducee. There was a cult called the Sadducees. That's what they call it in English. The Tzaddikim were a group of people who only believed, what they claimed, they only believed in the written Torah and not in the oral Torah. There's different theories of how they developed. I remember Beryl Wine said basically they were looking for excuses not to be so frum, but they wound up in other things being more strict, just so they wouldn't be, so they could be intellectually honest, so to speak. But it's often pointed out, there was a subsequent group that's not directly related to Karoyim, the Karaites, who had all kinds of traditions, and there's still small groups of them around today. They have all kinds of traditions, so they claim they only follow Sola Scriptura, they only follow what's written in the Chumash, but they come up with all kinds of traditions, some of which are similar to ours and some of which are different. The Tzaddokim had different groups, they were different than the Karayim, but they had the same mentality. The Tzaddokim hayu oimrim she'ein ma'aseh hapara kosher el murvei shemesh. So they were strict. They said that to be involved with the paraduma, you had to wait till nighttime. You couldn't be in this, what we could call a kind of the limbo state of the Tvul Yom. They had to wait till it's certainly night. Lefichach hayu bezdin b'vayisheni mitamenes akoyin asarif asapara b'sheretz ukiyoyse by v'toivel v'achrei kach oisik bo kadei levatel divrei elu hazedim shemerim me'ha'oil al rucham loy min ha'kabola. So what would happen? There was a big problem in the Second Temple times. Most of the Kohanim were Tzaddukim, especially the powerful ones, especially the Kohanim Gedolim, the ones of the Romans. They were often sellouts to the Romans. There's a whole interesting history with that. And so there was times in history where most of the Kohanim weren't, but there were a few Erlicha Kohanim, like we know Rabbi Chanina's Gana Kohanim. There were a few Erlicha Kohanim, but most of the Kohanim were not B'nai Torah. So, but the Sanhedrin, even there were times when the Sanhedrin was infiltrated by the Tzaddokim, and the Tzaddokim also had their own, the based in Shel Kaihanim, their own Sanhedrin. There was times, you might read certain historical accounts that say wild things and attribute to the Sanhedrin, and often that wasn't our Sanhedrin. There was another Sanhedrin that the Tzaddokim had their own Sanhedrin. People don't know that. But the real Sanhedrin, the Bezdin, our Bezdin of the Chachomim, in Bayasheni, what would they do? They would go out of their way that the Kohen, even though it was fine for the Kohen to be pure on the level of Harav Shemesh, that it was already nighttime. There was nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong to be strict. However, they would go out of their way to make the Kohen who was burning the paraduma, the ashes and everything, to make him tamei, make him touch a sheret, some kind of a dead animal that would make him tamei, and then dunking him in the mikveh. So then once he went to the mikveh, he would be a tvul yoim, and then he would have to, then he could do everything that was done with the paraduma. Why? We said this in order to nullify the words of these wanton individuals. It's almost poetic how the Rambam described their meanness. That he says that they were teaching from something that they just made up on their own, something that came up on their spirit, is the actual literal translation, something they just made up, loy min Kabbalah, without any tradition. Meaning, they want to claim they're going solo scriptura. They want to claim that they were only following what's written in the Bible, and they didn't have any extra traditions. But we see they might have their own traditions, and they wound up in certain things to be stricter, and the Chazal said, no, we can't be lenient like them, and you can't be strict like them. They would go out of their way to show, to demonstrate, to protest against the Tzaddokim, to show, no. Now, the Kalim also, they would make him touch a sheretz. They didn't do that in Bayis Rishon when they didn't have a problem, but when they had a problem, they went out of their way to make them tamei, and then put them in the mikvah, so there should be a tvul yoim, just to show that we're not being lenient like them, and we're not being strict like them either. Now, that teaches us a very deep lesson, a very important lesson. I'm sure you can think of things on your own, what we could learn from that. I mean, there are things today, I heard such a thing, I don't understand, it's sometimes hard enough to get a minyan together. So there's certain, from the egalitarians, They want the women to be equals. They want the women to count the minyan. All right, maybe you could say there's a mordcha that says the 10th of the minyan could be a woman. We don't paskin like that. But maybe they could say they have what to be soymech on. But no, they want to go stricter. They want to say you need to have 10 men and 10 women. And without that, it's not a minyan. There's such a thing in the world today. It's silly. It's ridiculous. I don't know how we could be matame with the sheretz for something like that to show that we're not holding like that. But l'maisa, it's ha'olam merucham shalom in Kabbalah, and this whole inyan of ha'olam merucham shalom in Kabbalah, that they make up things that have no source, has no future. I remember Rabbi Kolakowski in Yerushalayim. He said that why does it say by the Gemara in Shabbos, it talks about Maimed Har Sinai, it says Kafaleim Har Kagigas. It says that Hashem turned the mountain on them like a barrel. So why not like a mountain that would crush them? What's a barrel? A barrel is a container. You go to a museum, you see all kinds of curiosities, things from the past that don't exist anymore. Baruch Hashem, these tzeddokim, who were horrible people, who would stone people in the streets, they took things literally. People think they were more liberal, they wound up being crazier, because they took everything literally. Our Chazal made life livable. I mean, they didn't make it up. They were following a Kabbalah that came from Har Sinai, because that's what Kadosh Baruch Hu wanted us. He wanted life to be livable. He didn't want us to be just throwing stones at people in the street and all kinds of things. He wanted us to live a normal life. That's how Kadosh Baruch Hu wrote the Torah and gave it to us, and taught it to us. But so that's the danger of these groups. But more than that, it's just a curiosity. These groups are not around anymore. Once the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, they had nothing to live for. They had no Yiddishkeit without the Beis HaMikdash. But we have a Torah Kedosha that's portable, that goes with us. That's what makes us Hayom Hazeh Niyeh La'am. When we receive the Torah, not only Torah Sheb'Ksav, but also Torah Sheb'Al Peh. And so they can go on the shelf in a barrel, in a little container, the tzeddokim. We can remember how quaint it was when these groups existed. And so too we see many of the groups that 50 years ago would have told us that we wouldn't be here anymore and they're the future. And now they're dwindling and almost going to disappear. You see, Baruch Hashem, I've seen like in Queens places, there were old conservative temples, and now Baruch Hashem, they're Orthodox. They put up a mechitza because they knew they wouldn't survive without it. And so this is how we have a future, by being true to what Chazal told us, by being true to the Torah. And even if it means not to be lenient like them and not to be strict like them, even if it means to go out of your way to be metama with a sheretz and make someone a tvul yom, this is what Chazal taught us. This is the way, this is the derech. All right, you could discuss things in halacha. There's what to discuss, but this is a big lesson, and there are many other lessons I think we could learn from this. Rabbi Chanani min Akasha Eimer is a Kadosh Baruch Hu L'Zak Yisrael.